Hello everyone, my name is Brady Crawford. I'm a junior consultant at Kaizen Technologies in the Advanced Analytics Group. What I'm going to be doing today is just showing you a quick overview of how to create a data flow within Power BI. And Dataflows has become very prominent and is very high demand right now because of its ability to execute ETL logic within the Power BI service. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. The first step you want to do is you'll just go to app.powerbi.com and ensure that you're signed in as yourself on your profile, and you want to go to the workspace in which you'll operate in. Usually you'll create a new workspace to create data flows, but in some cases that might not be necessarily true. But in this case we'll start with a new workspace which is called Oxcart. So what I'm going to do is I click create and I'm going to select data flow. And you'll see two options. You can either define new entities or import a model. What you want to do is add a new entity into your data flow. And as it loads, you'll see all the different categories we can select from. So we can either choose an Excel file, an Access file, we can use a SQL Server database, or we can use an Azure SQL database. You name it, you can almost connect to it. And that is one of the beauties of data flows, as it allows you to connect to almost any data source that you need. In our case, I'm actually going to be using an Azure SQL database in which I just use the sample data from the AdventureWorks database on Microsoft's website. This will help us to just get a general idea of how Dataflows works. So what I'm going to do is connect to the server. So I'm going to go ahead and type in the server name. And as you can see, I typed in the server name and immediately it went ahead and filled out my credentials. And this is because of the gateway settings with this Azure SQL database. I already have connection and have all the credentials that I need, but in some cases this may become a problem for you. So if I try to connect to an Azure SQL database and I may not have approval or access to it, then that's something that I would have to adjust and ensure is fixed before I try to connect to it, or else it won't fill out the credentials for me. But here we can see I had no problems, and I'm going to go ahead and click next. So this is going to go ahead and connect me to that Azure SQL database. And as we can see, it's going to appear all of the different databases that are within this Azure SQL database, but in this case it's just the AdventureWorks. And if I click on this, I can see all the different tables that are within that. So for this example, let's just say we want to work with this customer table. So we're going to go ahead and load that up here. And as you can see, it brings up all that data for you to preview just like it would in desktop. But in this case, we're in the Power BI service and we actually are going to be able to use Power Query to transform that data and change it. So we'll be able to actually use data flows to go ahead and do all those data transformations that we would normally do. And then that way when we bring it into the desktop service, it has everything that we need the way that we want it. So I'm going to go ahead and click Transform Data. And as it loads up here, it'll take you to Power Query like we discussed. And here's the beauty of Power Query, especially when using an Azure SQL database or any type of SQL database. You can either go ahead and execute these transformations based on the different tools that Power BI gives you. You can add columns, use split by delimiter to split some columns, maybe such as this AdventureWorks and the salesperson name. But what you can do that might be appealing to most is that you can actually use Advanced Editor to just go ahead and use a SQL query if that's what you prefer. So in this case, I'm actually going to insert a SQL query to get the first name, middle name, last name, and company name from the customer table. And this is just to show you a quick overview of how you can actually go ahead and just use a SQL query to get the data that you want, rather than having to maybe get used to some Power BI tools that you may not be completely familiar with yet. And if I hit continue on that box, you can see I get all the information that I want, and it's from that query: first name, middle name, last name, company name. And now since we're done with this data flow, we want to go ahead and save and close. And this is going to validate the schemas and get everything loaded in the way that we want it. And then you'll name your data flow. In this case, I'm just going to name it customer. And sometimes it can be helpful to go ahead and write a description of how you created this data flow and what information you're looking to get out of it. This can be helpful for you, especially if you have multiple individuals that are admins in your Power BI enterprise, to make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as what this table should have in it. But in this case, we're just going to go ahead and save. And this step is pretty important. You'll see that it asks you to go ahead and do a refresh. You want to go ahead and refresh this now. And you can do that by clicking the refresh button there. And what this is doing is this is refreshing the data. So say that Azure SQL database had new data put in today. This could refresh it and get all that information that we need and have the most up-to-date information. And that's really helpful, especially with Dataflows, in that it can set scheduled refreshes to get the data on the times that you really specifically need them. So you may have a team meeting on Tuesdays to look at sales goals and to look at the updated sales that you have. And what you could do is set up a data flow to do that refresh before that meeting the day of. That way you could have the most up-to-date information for your meeting. So just a pretty cool tool to use there in Dataflows. But now we can see it's refreshed and everything looks good. And what I want to do now is actually use that data in Power BI Desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and open Power BI Desktop. And it'll load up here and it'll take just a second. And now that I'm in Power BI Desktop, I'm going to do what I would normally do. So I want to get some data. So I go to Get Data, and you can see you can have your normal choices with Excel or a SQL Server or a text or CSV file, but what we're going to do is actually do Power BI Dataflows. And since I'm signed into my account, it's actually going to connect to all Dataflows that I have access and have built. And as you can see here, you can see another area called Dataflows in which I've built out some other Dataflows for a project. But in this case, we just want to use the one that we just created in the Oxcart workspace and in the customer, and we'll use Sales LT Customer. And you can see here we're seeing that same view that we saw in Power Query on the web service. And since I already did the transformations that I want, I just want to load it in. And there it is. And something I always like to do is just to go ahead and put a table out there and enter my columns in, just to make sure that everything looks the way it's supposed to. So first name, middle name, last name, and company name. And here we can see everything is how it should be. And this has just been a really quick overview of how you can use Dataflows to edit and transform your data within Power Query on the Power BI service, and then be able to easily connect to it into Power BI Desktop through Dataflows. And it also showed you how you can use SQL queries within Advanced Editor to go ahead and shape and model the data the way that you're wanting to see it. This is just a brief overview, and Dataflows can do so much more and do so much more for you as far as what you're trying to do with your data along the way throughout your data journey. So hopefully in the future you can dive deeper into Dataflows, because it is becoming more and more prominent in today's Power BI world, and it's really going to help you be more successful in trying to get the most meaningful and up-to-date data within your Power BI enterprise.